Do you ever look at a group of kids and ask yourself this question? Why are they acting like that? Why do they do that? Well, Erik Erikson's theory is going to help us to understand what it is that's happening psychologically that drives them socially, hence the name psychosocial theory. Erikson was a contemporary of Freud, so if you're at all familiar with the work of Sigmund Freud, especially the psychoanalytic theory, you'll see some similarities between the things that we're going to talk about regarding Erikson and the things that Freud did. If you're not familiar with Freud's work, that's okay, because this is a heck of a lot better if you're trying to talk about kids. So we'll use this one. The first thing we need to know is that this theory, because of the way it's broken down, Erikson has broken it down into 8 different stages, as you can see at the bottom. This theory helps us to understand what those things are that are happening in the kids' heads and how that's going to affect their relationships. So it does help us to project and predict their interactional tendencies with other people. The second thing for us to understand here, especially about assessment of these kids, is that it helps us to understand the idea that assessment has to be developmentally appropriate, but it has to be appropriate on an interactional level as well. We need to set up the environment for assessment in such a way that we don't cause problems for the kids later on, that we don't set them up for failure. So we want to be very careful about all of that. We need to take into consideration who these kids are. Now, as I mentioned, there are 8 different stages in this theory. On this video, which is part 1 of 2, we'll talk about the first 3, and then on the next video, we'll talk about the remaining 5. So you are going to want to watch these videos in succession, and it probably won't be more than about 20 minutes total. All right, the first stage in Erikson's theory, which is chronologically arranged. So we start at birth, and it goes all the way through until old age. Trust versus mistrust. 0 to 1 years. And if we think about what the needs are of a child during that time of 0 to 1 years of life, they don't have a whole lot of really specific needs. It's not like they're going to ask to borrow the car. What they would like is they would like to have some sleep, they'd like to have their diaper changed, they'd like to have love. Those kinds of things, just the basics of life. If they get those, they will tend to have this sense of trust, because it will happen through consistent and continuous love and support. It develops over time. Now this is a good time to mention how this whole theory works and sort of what the metaphor is we're going to look at. If you look down here, trust versus mistrust. Think of all of these as levels that have these continuums within them. During the whole time of 0 to 1 years, this pointer is moving back and forth between the experiences that a child has, and they're constantly sort of evaluating whether that's going to end up as a trust thing. Can I trust the world? Or do I mistrust the world? Do I not have this consistent and continuous love and support? The window opens at the first number that you see in the stage. The window closes around the second number that you see in the stage. So the window opens at 0 years and closes at 1 year. During that time, it's what happens that will set that level. It will set the pointer at that level, and it will just freeze. Now, back to Freud's theory. Freud's idea was that we can go back in and pry open the window and mess around with the things that are inside that stage to improve where that pointer finally ended up, and then we can close the window again and fix people. Believe that as you will, but Erikson's theory is the one that really identifies these different stages. The second one, autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is kids who are 1 to 3 years of age, and remember, think about who these kids are. 1 to 3 years, these, in Piagetian terms, are pre-operational, or, well, they're moving into pre-operational at about 2 years. So these kids are all about themselves. They're all about their perception. They are perceptually dominated. Well, that carries over into this autonomy versus shame and doubt, because their favorite phrase is, me do it. Think about it. Me do it. What they would like to do is they want to be involved, they want to be engaged in all of the actions that they're going to do. So, you remember the commercial about a child who went to the refrigerator, pulled out a carton of orange juice, put a glass down, and dumped the orange juice in and on and around and under and everywhere. And the child, from that standpoint, that child was fully engaged, completely did the activity by himself. And that made it a great time. That was an autonomy moment. That was wonderful. Look down here. Independence does come from success, but we find it necessary to bound that, to find the edges, to know where that is. This stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt, is important because it gives a sense that to the child that they are able to operate successfully in this world where they find themselves. The problem is, and this is the problem in all of these stages, when we look at the negative side of this, we would say, yeah, we'd really like kids to be autonomous. We don't really want them to feel shame and doubtful about themselves. But do we want them to be wildly autonomous? There is a reasonableness to where these kids could end up. And what we want them to do is we want them to end up in places that are safe and healthy and predictive of success later on. So if this is autonomy and this is shame and doubt, maybe I don't want them to be clear over on the side of autonomous. Maybe I'd like for them to be just a little bit back from that, just so that they check themselves occasionally. Those kinds of things those are where the kids are going to end up according to that pointer. The third stage in Erikson's theory is initiative versus guilt. Now look at this. From 3 to 6, so we're talking about kids who are preschool and into first or second grade, probably. A willingness to investigate comes from, and look at this, meeting and accepting challenges. What's interesting about that is that meeting and accepting challenges doesn't say meeting and being successful with the resolution of challenges. At one point in my life, I was working as a land sports director at a camp, and one of the activities that we had was for the entire camp to be split into two, and there was this huge earth ball. It was about 8 feet across, and they would roll it down the field, and the team that got it across the other team's end line would get a point, and that was the culminating experience of this day-long activity. Well, what happened was this. Erik got out in the middle. By the way, Erik was 5 years old. Here's the stage. Erik was in the middle of the field. About 5 8th-grade boys were pushing this ball very fast down the field. Erik got out in the middle and went, "Stop!" And when he did that, the ball didn't stop. Nothing happened. So Erik thought, well, okay, that didn't work. So he threw himself into the ball. He jumped and threw himself into the ball as it arrived at him, and about 30 feet back was where he landed from that experience. Flat on his back, wind out of him. By the time I ran over to him, I saw him convulsing a little bit, and he wasn't actually convulsing. He was laughing. He had had the most successful, amazing experience of his life. He hadn't stopped the ball, but he had met the challenge. And that, to him, was an amazing experience. That certainly gave him a sense of initiative. He was rewarded for that. As we go into the next video, we'll look at the remaining 5 sections of Erikson's theory.